There's a proverb, right? Show me a man skilled in his craft, and I'll show you someone who performs before kings. And I think with AI and everything coming down the pipeline, like people who are amazing at what they do, there's always a market for them. Always.
Welcome to the Faith at Work podcast, sponsored by Servant.io. Servant is focused on helping faith organizations maximize their impact with cutting-edge tech. But this show is all about equipping you with wisdom and insights from Christians who are on the front lines of business and technology. I'm your host, Jake Oswald. Let's get into this week's episode. Hello and thanks for joining us. Today we're joined by Ryan Bethea, a dynamic founder, producer, writer, and host who's been making waves with his chart-topping podcast, The Exorcist Files, and cutting-edge creative agency, Assembly 72. With a background in marketing and a passion for storytelling, Ryan has made a career out of shedding light on topics most people shy away from. Today we'll be diving into his personal and professional journeys and the insights he's earned along the way. Ryan, thanks for joining us today. We're happy to have you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right, we're going to start off with a little bit of a softball question. What led you to create the Exorcist Files? How did that all get started?
Yeah, one does not wake up and decide to just walk into the Vatican and try and document real stories and testimonies of demonic deliverance. That was a wild one, but it's actually a very long story, but distilled down. I was going through a really tough season in life in my own faith and was like, you know what? I don't really see a lot of, quote, miraculous stuff aside from the very nature of being alive, right? It's funny how we can go down that path of, oh, there's no miracles anymore. And yet, I woke up this morning, and I didn't choose to be born. And the world is spinning around a ball of gas. Oh, there's like miracles everywhere. But at the time, I didn't want to see that. And I was like, if the Christian narrative is true, I should see some cool stuff. And I went out and just started researching and interviewing a lot of people to just collect their best stories and just found some wild ones. And then I actually pitched that idea to a friend after something cool actually finally happened to me. And this friend who worked at a major film studio was like, hey, that's a great show idea. Would you be able to put something together? And I said, absolutely, of course. So part of that process, I learned that the Catholic Church has a process for canonizing saints that requires them to investigate accounts of miracles, which is really cool. It's this process I don't think many people outside maybe the Catholic faith recognize, but they have a team of doctors that have to independently come to the conclusion that what happened was a theological miracle. So physical healing of some sort usually, and it had to be proven to be tied to the intercession of this saint. And they throw out 99% of the claims, but the ones that make it through, lung cancer being healed, Parkinson's being healed, they have some crazy cool stories. And there's a whole office that does it. And actually throughout history, that's where we got the term the devil's advocate, because they would actually present someone to oppose the case. And historically that was called the devil's advocate, to say it's not a miracle. And so I went in and I basically just posted on Facebook, anyone know anyone at the Vatican? And someone responded who connected me with someone who connected me with someone. And I flew out there, and long story short, I got to meet Father Carlos Martins, and he promptly turned me down. I said, do you want to do a show? He turned, they said, hey, this is someone we send some of our most extreme spiritual warfare cases to. You should talk to him. And I did. And he told me a few stories, and I went, this is amazing. We have to make a show. And he's like, no, kid, this isn't a joke. Like, this is real. And I said, that's why we have to tell the stories. And so then from there, we went out, shopped it as a TV show. Then COVID hit. And COVID is destroyer of dreams. And I thought, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And then a friend was actually fasting and praying for me, as good friends do. And she said, hey, I feel like you're supposed to meet this person. And I met them. And 2 days later, we had an offer from iHeartRadio, which is the largest podcast network in the world. And they funded the first season. And we created this amazing show that I'm so blessed and thankful to be a part of, with a Protestant co-hosting with a Catholic priest on a catechesis of spiritual warfare, using dramatizations like old time radio, but 3D audio. You'll hear the demons, you'll hear doors opening and slamming behind you, with theology. And now thousands of people have written us and said how much it's improved their walk, or they've come to Christ as a result of it. And if that's all I ever do, can die a happy man. I'm very thankful. And so thankful that I posted on Facebook. Moral of the story is, post your dreams on Facebook. You never know what might happen.
That's an awesome story. You're making me think about posting some stuff online too now. I've never been so brave.
Be careful what you post though too. There's a cautionary tale in there, I'm sure, as well.
True. All right, how about the origin story for Assembly 72? How did that get started?
Less dramatic, less exciting. But my business partner at the time was like, hey, you're too comfortable here. You're more talented than this. You can go make a lot more money. And I was like, no, but I love working here and it's super chill and it's fun. And I love working. He's like, I know, but I want to see you step into everything God has for you. So,
Hmm.
it's not firing. It's more like, hey, kind of like a parent being like, we both know that in your heart, you want to do more than this. And this is comfortable and you're not satisfied with comfortable. It's great, but like at the end of the day, you don't want to be like the Braveheart quote, right? And, lying in your beds, trade all the days to come back for a chance to do something different. And
Hmm.
so I was like, you're right. You're right. And he was like, hey, why don't you build out a plan for a media company? And I said, well, we'll make the flagship show this podcast where we tear out the inside of an old shuttle bus and we'll drive around the country in a mobile studio and just see who we get as guests. And that turned into, I went camping where we literally have like campfire conversations and we had on faith, just like reaching out coldly to people. We had David Henry, Bubba Watson, John O'Hurley, who plays Mr. Peterman on Seinfeld, which is like my favorite interview ever. The producer of A Star Is Born. We had, I mentioned Chuck Liddell was like the scariest / coolest, like facing off against this like UFC legend, Kathy Lee Gifford. It was wild. It was just so, so fun. We started a media company through that. And because we had no audience to start off with, we needed some revenue, as companies tend to appreciate. So I went out and sold some sponsorships. And for those sponsorships, we wrote some ads. And I've always been, since my even fraternity days, I was always writing skits and content, big growing up SNL, fan, etc. And I have a weird family connection, which I can't talk about on here. I'll say that for behind the paywall. But I have a close family friend who was on SNL for a long time. And so we got to be exposed to that. And I was like, I love comedy. I just love comedy. And so I was like, all right, let's write these cool skits. And the brand loved it and they performed well. And I was like, I thought we could do this for a lot of others. And people started writing in saying, hey, can you do ads like that for us? And a good friend of mine actually happened to be like someone who manages a ton of the spend. And I won't say his name because I don't want to give him that much credit because it'll go to his head, but he was such a blessing and just sent us so much work because there's just a need for creative and kind of blew us up in our little space. We're not competing for Ad Age. We're not going for Inc. fastest growing. I was actually really shaped because I read a book called Traction. It's either called Traction or Scaling Up. I forget the name of it. I think it was the Traction book, but it had a thought exercise and it said, while your ego and your heart might say, yeah, it'd be so cool to have this big company and hundreds of employees and the impact, right? But it said, would you rather be running a company with 100 employees working, 70 hours a week, making, $5 million a year and fairly stressful, but maybe good, but stressful too? Or would you rather make a couple $100,000 having a great time with your friends working like with the three of you working like 10 hours a week, right? And you go, yeah, I mean, in those two cases, I would love the latter. I'm like, that sounds way more fun. And so I said, you know what? That's how we're going to kind of do our thing. We're going to have fun. We're going to take on the projects that we believe in, that we care about, that we actually believe in the products. And again, we don't use everything because people have to, there's certain clothes that I think are ridiculously expensive that I would not buy. But you know what? People love them and they rave about it. We want to bring products and things to people. We want to help people find that which they really want. So basically it just comes down to how people tell their stories. And we love that more than anything. We don't view ourselves as people trying to get you to buy something. We view ourselves as someone to say, you've got a story. Every brand has a story. We want to help you tell it in a way that's authentic, fun, and different than maybe what's out there. And yeah, we've been really blessed. We've had a really great couple of years, and it's cool while we pursue the bigger projects, the Exorcist Files, our show with the Special Forces, our show with CBN that's coming out. While we get to do those bigger ones, it's really a blessing to keep the lights on day by day, because whether you're doing a 30-second ad or a 2-hour movie, there are inciting events, aka hooks. There are keeping the plot going through the middle and then landing the plane with a good conclusion. Like there's character, there's story, all of that, even the smallest ad all the way up to your biggest TV series. So it's cool that we get to kind of practice that day by day. If you're gonna be a producer, you have to be okay with rejection. I think my sales training got me there. Like you learn that you just like no has to deflect off you, because as a producer, your job is to just put out fires and to will something across the finish line. You have to bring financing, you have to get permissions, you have to manage egos. Thankfully, in my work, I don't have to deal with that. So everyone I've been able to work with has been really cool. But there are, just like anyone who works in office politics, etc., there are different levers that you have to pull on to get things done. There's also tons of dead ends. There's calls and chases that go a long way. You think it's going to end up in financing or something, and it doesn't. And there are days you just want to pull your hair out and say, like, why am I doing this? But then when it all comes together and you get a note from someone who says, hey, my life was changed because of it, you go, this is why we do what we do. And I'm sure it's akin to parenting, right? I'm sure there's days where it's not that fun, but at the end of the day, you wouldn't trade it for the world. And so if you're a producer, you just have to get used to no, because everyone told me it'll never work with reenactments, right? And then it's a hit. And now everyone's like, of course we love reenactments. So you just got to wait it out and just have trust in your vision, and just get the best companies that come up with these shows. They get turned down all the time. I mean, Netflix, Hulu, they hear hundreds of pitches constantly. I think it's hundreds a week. And so most are not a fit. Think about how few shows make it out, and it's okay. And it's just everyone's doing their best attempts at guessing what's going to be a hit. So you just can't take it personally. Stranger Things was turned down by a lot of things. I think Yellowstone was turned down. Like, you just don't know. And then you just got to will it forward.
How many years was it that you worked on the Exorcist Files before you finally actually started to see that it was succeeding?
Well, thankfully, we did 4 years of just shopping it around. Then we took a year to make it and record it. And thankfully, when it came out, it was a hit right away. iHeart's got an amazing marketing machine. The content latched on, and that year we came out, I think we stayed on the top of the Spotify charts for like 30 weeks, something like that, of the Christian charts. And so, we actually found success very quickly.
So 4 years of you pitching this thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Get used
to know. Did you ever almost quit?
No, because I knew the IP is amazing and I knew it was going to be a hit. You just got to wait it out, because people say no and then the mandates change, or a show will break out and be a huge hit. Now, I will say podcasting was not on I want to go TV first, but when COVID hit, and we were hit with so many logistical nightmares if you were trying to create a TV show. I mean, if you look at the requirements or what it was going to take to actually make a TV show, it wasn't going to happen. But it's funny. I mean, this is also a lesson in just God's timing, because I wanted it to come out so much sooner. And in 2023, when we came out, it was the year the Pope's Exorcist came out. It was the year the actual Exorcist was rebooted. It was in the zeitgeist. Like, God just knew this is the right place, right time to make this thing come out. And if we'd come out any earlier or later, I'm convinced it wouldn't have been as huge of a hit as it was. So timing's odd. I mean, would Ted Lasso be as successful? It's a great show, but I mean, the most upbeat, optimistic show ever comes out in the heart of the middle of a pandemic, which has everyone questioning everything. Timing is a huge deal. Or Yellowstone, right? It's like a giant Travel Channel episode. Amazing landscapes of Utah and Wyoming and Montana while we're all locked inside. I'm like, that, of course. So timing is a huge thing for a lot of this, but I knew the IP was good, and I was excited when someone proposed it as a podcast. I didn't know we could do that at iHeart, and I'm actually thankful we did, because making a podcast is super fun. And then once it's a hit, now I got a whole different conversation when it comes to TV.
True. You have a seat at the table. So you mentioned timing is a big factor. You mentioned iHeart's marketing machine is a big factor, and you've got great IP. Is there anything else that you would attribute all the success that the Exorcist Files has had to?
Well, one, the priest is phenomenally gifted. Father Martins is really talented. He's a gifted teacher. He's got a great voice. It just, the right ingredients kind of came together, right? I mean, you have a Protestant and a Catholic. You have different vantage points. I'm very bullish on that going forward, that people love ecumenical media, not just theologically, but politically. People like hearing stuff from both sides. We've lived in this kind of rage porn environment for so long that we're at each other's throats politically, are just disagreeing on social issues. And I think people really are hungry for, and when they see it and engage with content that's ecumenical and says, hey, I disagree. Like, I don't personally understand, there's certain Catholic doctrines that I've not been able to intellectually wrap my mind around. But now, having worked with so many incredible, spirit-filled, amazing Catholics who I think walk closer to Christ than I do in many cases, like, you go, oh man, like, I can disagree or not understand, or recognize that it's gray. Church history is very gray, and it's cool. And you just go, wow, like, I really appreciate where you're coming from. And so that's cool. That's one of the most common notes we get for the show. And we just did a different format. The 3D audio is really cool. I owe that to iHeart. We had a producer in season 1 who was really, championed that, and he did an amazing job with that. And I think it just sounded different. And it was just a whole different format than what you're used to. Because I'll say anyone can do a podcast, but there's a big difference between you and I hopping on and having a great interview versus like writing out scripts through engineering audio to where we're actually recording people
Right.
out in the first season. We had people running around actually like acting out these scenes in front of a mic with ears. It actually has ears on it. It's wild. And it's a lot of script writing and it's amazing. And also father stories are, I mean, insane. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, there's no chat GPT prompt that will generate the kind of stuff this comes out. And then he tells it with such conviction. He's like, yeah, I was in the room. This is what happened. And you're like, this is wild.
How many months or years have you been working with him now? And what all would you say you've learned from him?
A few years, we've been working together. He always critiques my grammar. But as I try to remind him, I often write with the intent of speaking aloud. And so there are grammatical rules. For example, you typically don't start a sentence with, I think audibly, it just sounds cool. And you go, now hear me on this, right? Like there's certain things that we will spar over. I have learned a lot theologically. I mean, he has prompted a lot of my search theologically. I encourage every Christian to do this because most Christians, I think we just tend to gravitate towards the tradition we grew up in and we don't think much about it, right? And I think every Christian should wrestle with and study church history and decide for themselves wherever you're going to land. Like, okay, is Rome the answer? Is the Orthodox Church the answer? Or is the sort of broader, more kind of unseen global church, non-denominational thing the answer? Because we all should want to know. And so he's really inspired me to look and say, okay, I imagine the Christian walk is like a menu, right? Here's all these biblical promises and all these gifts from God that are available to us in our walk. But what if, and I don't know, because I'm still praying and researching and process, but what if it's a menu? And what if, on this menu, it's like God promises wisdom. He promises to speak. He promises to draw near to you in your worst times. He promises that his timing is better, even if it doesn't look good right now. He promises he'll take care of you financially. You won't necessarily be rich, but he just promised that I'll look after you, right? If you honor him, if you put him first on everything, he's like, I'll put that right back on you. If you gaze upon him, you'll look more like him. So there's all these things we all agree on. But then what if there was this whole like off menu that we don't recognize? What if holy water that we've kind of forgotten about? What if there's like, hey, I gave you a gift of this blessed element that you can use to bless things as an outward physical expression of my grace? What if the saints in heaven, like we all agree everyone's alive in heaven, right? What if they could? Like, what if, we know angels appear to people and there's prophecy. We expect Elijah and Moses appeared on a mountain. What if the saints in heaven, like, what if God's like, you can get reps in, like, you can come down and part, like Jake's going through a tough time and he's praying. And what if, we have had two people on the show share stories that are they're Protestant, that Mary appeared to them in the hospital and just to comfort them. So what if as part of my prayers, when I go to Christ first for everything, but what if I am allowed to say, hey, anyone who hears this prayer, would you join me in praying with me? Right? That would be cool. Like the goats, the all-time greats are up there. Like a lot. I could have Elijah praying with me, the guy who called fire from heaven. I don't know. I mean, if that was a thing, we'd want to know, right? You wouldn't want to miss out on that stuff. So there are things that I look at and I go, okay, cool. We should all want to know if there's more. And we should want to know if it's not true. So we stay focused on what is. So I just say church history is fun to look into. We take for granted this Bible that we have. Christians didn't have this text for hundreds or thousands up until 1500. It's like this idea that you have this whole collected Bible and just get to pick your commentary and go to the church that matches your beliefs. It's a relatively modern development, right? So I've been wrestling with that. Who decides what each verse means in Protestantism? I don't know. Because there are disagreements, right? I have my Catholic friends will say, I go to different churches and I get, why does that church believe that and that church? And I'd say generally they're pretty minor disagreements, right? How do you decide what means what? So all that to say, those are examples of how we've had great conversations. It has challenged my thinking and made me just say, okay, you know what? It's not one or the other for me right now. I'm in a search for truth and I want all that Jesus has for me and nothing more.
Is there anything that you've changed your mind on?
One, I think if you had asked me early on, I think I would have just dismissed a lot of Catholic claims. It's funny because people are like, oh, I know a lot of Catholics who are saved. And I'm like, you know what? Like, there's Protestants who are terrible people too. Jesus has that scary passage of like, many of you will come to me and say, look at all the cool stuff I did, right? And I'll be like, get out of here. So I would say I'm open to intercession of the saints, right? But with the caveat being, I don't want it to be like Jesus is the first the thing we go after the most, or that's the thing I direct my prayers to. But I'd be open to saying, okay, as long as it was in the context of, would you join me and pray with me? Because I think the accusation is that there's saint worship, right? Which clearly is wrong. Jesus is the only one we want to worship.
Mm.
That's something I'm like, again, I have good friends who are Protestants who have had Mary appear to them. So like, I think I'm getting to a place where I was like, maybe we don't honor the Mother of God enough in Protestantism. I'm still very torn on a lot of the Marian dogmas in Catholicism that I have a tough time with, like her being without sin. That's a tough thing to wrap my head around. Also, Catholics have a great framework for suffering. There's a whole redemptive like view of like, this is what suffering is and how it's meaningful. And so just interviewing all these really spirit-filled, awesome, brilliant Catholics is just made me just appreciate that God's church is really big. And that goes for Orthodox too. We've had several Orthodox priests come on that just like blew my mind. And I'm just realizing there's a lot, put it this way, there's a lot more than my kind of, I think, relatively sheltered little quiet Presbyterian upbringing as well. And so that's something that's been deeply meaningful and moving to me. I used to be like, oh, there's no way a pope could be a thing. Like, I'm still, jury's out for me. I'm researching that. But I would say it doesn't logically bother me that there's a head of a church. Every church has an elder board and an executive pastor. Every company has a president. I was like, one day I was thinking to myself, what is so offensive if there was a church on earth? Like Christ said, there's a church on earth, right? Now, it seems to make sense. He is the head of the church. But even then, is it that offensively weird to think that he would leave like a rep, like a prime minister? It's like, that's not the most wild thing to think about. It's an organization, right? So where it gets interesting is if that person can then bind teachings on you that you don't believe in. So that's where it gets like, oh, that's where it gets really interesting. And that's something, so for the theologically minded people listening to this, I know every time I talk like this, I get hundreds of emails from Catholics saying, let me answer all your objections, Ryan, right now. And then other Protestants email me and say, oh, he's slipping, watch out. And I'm like, oh, I just want to know what Christ wants for me and what's my walk with him and like, where is he leading me? And obviously this is something I really appreciate too. One of the first questions I asked Father Martins was, what do you make of all the revivals? Great Awakening 1 and 2 and Hebrides and the Methodist movement, Azusa Street, right? And I'm like, those are huge moves of God. I asked him, Billy Graham's ministry, net positive or not? He goes, oh, absolute positive. And that was so cool to hear a Catholic priest say, yes, Billy Graham's ministry and the saving of millions of people by getting baptized, that's enormous. That's a huge win, right? And so that meant a lot to me. And, conversely, there are Catholic revivals. Marian apparitions, like in Mexico, where 20 million Aztecs converted to Catholicism because of the Marian apparition, like wiped out like the pagan religion there. And you go, okay, like we probably need to look into that. Our Lourdes, there's all these miracles that have been alleged to happen in France with another Marian apparition. And you go, okay, there's the world's wild. That's what I tell everyone. The world is just crazier than I think we all think. All this UFO stuff is nothing compared to. It's not that scandalous. There's weird stuff happening everywhere. And again, I've interviewed exorcists from every tradition now. Like, the world's bigger than I think most of our theological frameworks. There's a lot more out there.
I'm tempted to ask you for one or two high-level stories that really opened your eyes. Does anything come to mind?
On spiritual warfare or theology, or like for what?
Yeah, anything at all. I, like you, have a sheltered Protestant background. And all my friends, that's kind of my whole circle. So what's a story that for someone like me would open my eyes?
This is the cool part about talking about spiritual warfare with the Exorcist Files, right? There is tremendous agreement, right? Catholics and Protestants line up, and the Orthodox too, right? Look, Jesus is the only savior, right? You cannot be saved without Jesus, right? Cool, done. There is God, there's Jesus. There is the Holy Spirit, right? And they are the Trinity, and no one else is equal to that. Like that's not disagreement. So there's tremendous agreement there, right? The Pope is not infallible. I feel it's like I had a beautiful anecdote we just shared on Recon where like the Pope has to go to confession just like everyone else, right? And there's a beautiful story of John Paul II. Like, I guess this priest had really pissed him off and had been trashing him something in the public or whatever. And so he brought the guy in and he just like railed on him. And he said, all right, anything else, Your Eminence? I forget what the Pope's title is. It's like Your Excellency or Your Eminence. And he goes, yes, would you take my confession now? Right? And then Pope John Paul II kneels and asks, because you can't forgive yourself, right? From that standpoint, right? And I was like, that's just so beautiful. Like an image of like the Pope kneeling before someone else and saying, I'm sorry. Like, would you hear my confession? So that's been really cool. I will say confession is something. So James 5 says, confess your sins to one another, right? That you may be healed. So um, I have really grown to appreciate, because I interview a lot of Catholics and they say going to confession is just Father Martin's actually said the closest he feels to Christ is in the confessional. And not because yes, theologically, right, in the Catholic doctrine, you're supposed to go and you have to go. But it's also just this beautiful idea that, like, the seal of confession, nothing can break. You can't tell anything that happens in the booth. You can never say anything. Why? Because every sin before God has to be treated the exact same way. No matter how serious, it's forgivable. You come with a contrite heart, you can say anything, right? And they can't question it. There are actual laws to try and change that, where they force priests to, reveal what's in the confessional. But it's like it's stronger than any attorney-client privilege. And so I just thought that's really beautiful. Secondly, I have started weekly confession with just my brothers in the faith. It doesn't mean like anything. It's obviously, thank God, nothing big. It's just like, you were short-tempered with this person, right? Or you were like, like, yeah, I could have handled that situation better. And when you do weekly ongoing confession proactively, it's really beautiful. It's very freeing. Somehow we got away from this because it literally says James 5 to do this. And what's really cool is someone will share something and you'll go, man, I'm so sorry. And you're like, remind them, hey, God forgives you, right? Sin no more. And then maybe 2 weeks later, you're tempted in that very same way or face a similar situation. And you can remember the contrition that was brought on your brother from what he heard. And and it motivates you not to. And so knowing you're in this regular rhythm of having to say, like, it's embarrassing. You look like, hey, like, man, I snapped at that person, right? I'm supposed to be this like spirit-filled Christian. And it's cool to have someone look you in the eye. And then when they go, oh my gosh, me too. So that's very beautiful. I would say the Marian apparitions to my two Protestant friends, that's wild. I've never heard anything like that. It's funny. I tell my Catholic friends, they're like, yeah, duh. Right. And it's probably similar to like if someone who's not Christian said, oh my gosh, like I was praying and like, I didn't know what to do. And then someone sent me this verse out of the blue and it told me exactly what I needed to hear. I'd be like, yeah, so it's funny to like what's normal to them. But hearing two Protestants who have Marian appearances with the same message, I come to comfort you in the name of the Father. Like, these are two people I deeply respect and trust and are not like out there. These are like Bible based, like strict. And I would say look into the canonization process. That's a huge one because they throw out so many miracles. It takes 10 years. I'll send you an article when we're done. Like they look into, for someone to become a saint, they have to have 2 miracles. And these miracles have to be proven. And these doctors vote anonymously. Like, it's wild. So something is happening. And again, I'll be the first to say that doesn't prove it's the saints, but it's like, it also could be, well, God is honoring people seeking him. And that's something, Father Marian just completed this tour with the Arm of St. Jude. And the Relics, for example. Actually, this is a cool story that I can tell spiritual warfare on. So I actually keep a rosary in my pocket. I don't pray the rosary, but I keep a rosary in my pocket because I love being as a very kind of ADD, kind of OCD mind, having something physical, like the earliest Christians, like beads that you could just like each bead, pray for this, pray for this, pray for this. Giving you something tactile has really helped me focus in my prayer life. And so I carry this in my pocket now because by God's grace, sometimes I get to be in rooms with people exponentially more successful than me and maybe 10 years younger. And I keep this as a physical reminder in my pocket. So every time I put my hand in my pocket, it's a reminder, Lord, thank you for what you've given me. Let me not covet other people's stuff. Remind me of my identity, and having a physical reminder, which again, going through Joshua this morning, like 4 chapters in, he's like, build stone. We just crossed over, build stones here. Remind you of what the Lord did this day. And so I keep this like physical reminder. And I was at a conference last year, actually, and it's a longer story, but someone had just announced they were doing a project that I had really wanted to do for a long time. And I was so bummed and was just like, oh. And then I remember I touched that. I put my hand in my pocket. I was like, oh, all right, Lord, thank you so much. Not my will be done. You've chosen them. God bless it. Right. And then that moment, they were on stage doing this announcement, and the guy interviewing him stopped, said, hey, before we go off on this movie tangent, this movie project we're talking about, I want to honor someone in the audience right now because we do need to mention podcasts. The Exorcist Files has changed my life. I am a better Christian because of it. It's the most formative piece of Christian content I've ever had. And the whole room turned, and I
That's
got an
cool.
applause, and I go, so relics, baby. It's a little different, but yeah, Acts 19:12. They brought handkerchiefs and aprons to touch Paul's garments, and they brought it back, and it healed the sick and cast out demons. Like, what? So here are these stories from all these exorcists where they put physical objects on demoniacs and they freak out. I'm like, you hear from one, you go, all right. You hear from two, you go, all right. You hear from like 8. They're not paid per exorcism, right? None of them want to be. Here's the thing: none of them want to be interviewed. They're all quiet, private. I have to pry it out of them, and under the like, hey, would you help warn people? You would be shocked at how like guarded they are, and that to me is a huge sign of the credibility there as well. So I've heard enough
Where do you think the guardedness comes from?
because it's serious. I think anyone who talks about spiritual warfare knows that it's super serious, right? We don't have to be afraid of it, obviously, but like when you talk to these guys who battle, we have a very real adversary, and when you have guys who like are out there on the front lines, like combating it, I think one part of what makes a great exorcist is humility. Because think about it, you are in there as someone like whether you're an exorcist or a deliverance minister, you are invoking God's power, and God is the exorcist fundamentally, right? Removing the enemy from someone, and these are extreme cases, right? So, one, it's very private. This again, sacred. Like people do embarrassing, horrible things. We get all the time. People email me and say, "Where's the tapes?" Right? And I'm like, "Fine, show me your therapy tapes with your spouse. I'd love to go over Tell me about your marriage." Like, no, we change a lot of details to protect a lot of people because it's embarrassing. Also, try going to work on Monday after the word gets out that you were crawling on the ceiling. People be like, "Oh,
Right.
yeah, Jake in accounts receivables was on the Exorcist Files." Like, careful, no pea soup for him. I think they're very private. They also recognize that it's not something to glorify whatsoever. And that's something I talk to a lot of spiritual warfare people, and like they're all super like, dude, it's not glamorous. Like, it's amazing to see someone set free, but dude, I mean, these guys have been spit on, they've been thrown up on, they've like been called horrible. Now, granted, we're profiling extreme cases, but I have a good friend who did deliverance ministry in Africa for a long time with a big ministry, and he goes, dude, it's not fun having witch doctors threaten you and throw blood. I mean, it's yucky. And there's obviously scriptural precedent for this, right? Because the apostles come back and they're like, Jesus, the demons submit to us. This is awesome. And he's like, do not rejoice in that. Rejoice that you're saved. Your name is written in the book of life. Like he knew it was going to be intoxicating, right? And so that's why humility is so important for an exorcist. A lot of them are older just because they're seasoned and more mature, Yeah, it's a wild world, but you hear the stories, and that's where I think it's really cool. Protestants and Catholics can really agree because it's like devil's the bad guy, Jesus is the good guy. You're not supposed to have demons, and if you do, it's because most likely, in 99% of cases, there was a doorway opened, right? And God sovereignly permitted that affliction to happen. And we see that in the New Testament when they're like, Jesus, and in some cases, we don't know exactly why, right? The blind man and the apostles are like, hey, who sinned? This guy's blind. Who sinned? Like, that was the understanding. And he said, no one sinned, actually. Today, we are going to show you his healing so that God's grace can be seen firsthand. And you're like, for God to get glory. So that's a weird one, too, where sometimes you're just like Job. You're allowed to go through hell just so his goodness can be made known. And that's a wild one. It's a tricky one for our philosophy students out there.
Yeah. No kidding. You mentioned something at the beginning of this interview about how in 2023, I think, you said that the timing was just right. It was in the zeitgeist. And I'm thinking back, I think I heard in one of your early episodes that it was articulated that there was a spike in spiritual warfare in 2018. And it was like an urgent call to action. Where did that come from? And like, tell us
Yeah.
about that. That's all that I know, and I want to know more.
There was just a huge uptick in the number of reported possessions. And so it's important to note that in the Catholic Church, possession is an extraordinarily rare thing, and it's treated as such. But as far as demonization or being attacked by the enemy, I'd say that's pretty par for the course. I mean, you look around the world and we just, it's hard because we live in America and we're so blessed. And I spend my time in Southern California. It's like, this is, it's raining today. That's my biggest issue right now is it's rain. It's not 72 degrees. And I'm like, where are you, God? That's kind of the issue with them is that what we were talking about in that case is that, or that marketing video, is that there's such an uptick in reported cases, and many of them are not. Like the Catholic Church is way more likely to give you they'll give you psychiatric evaluation. They'll attribute it to natural causes. But you talk to exorcists and they will say that they've seen a massive uptick in these cases. And part of that's because John Eldridge actually said on a recent podcast with Matt Fradd, the fastest growing religion in America is witchcraft. Now, I haven't verified that stat, but it wouldn't shock me when you look at just fascination with the occult, right? And sometimes it's like not overt, it's like sort of hidden stuff that's hidden in plain sight. I would just look at shows called like Lucifer, et cetera, right? And I'm not saying that anything of that is like them deliberately trying to evil or whatnot, but it's like a better example, maybe like they had Satan Con in 2023, like they had a convention for the Church of Satan, like just stuff that's just like out there, 2 weeks ago, there was a court case in Topeka, Kansas about consecrated hosts being stolen. That's actually something very interesting. I went to a Catholic church with my friend, and they have someone watch to make sure you take communion if you're a member of the Catholic Church, because people will try and steal them and use them in occult practices. So that's a common thing. And you talk to, and not just Catholics, I mean, I've met Protestants as well who say, yeah, there's witch covens. I have some wild stories from friends I wish I could share on here, but they've kind of sworn to secrecy until they resolve. I mean, the number of people who are actively facing like cursing from witches, etc. Like here's a minor one that I'm allowed to share because it's featured on an upcoming show and it was in the X-Files. But a dear friend of mine, Pastor Evan Wickham down here in San Diego, like they had a visiting preacher who on the second service just could not get he was like really fumbling over his words and felt like, you okay, man? Is it, you need a cup of coffee? And outside, their greeters found there were just these witches outside drawing pentagrams and cursing the church. They removed them, and suddenly he was able to speak normally again. Right? So again,
same thing happened to one of my pastor friends. Couldn't get through a sermon. Found a guy in the back of the room, excused him, and then he was fine. Crazy.
It's a weird thing. I think we all face spiritual warfare. I think if you look at some of our music and some of our imagery, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing us he didn't exist. I think that because the pendulum's swinging the other way, a lot of people probably think, oh, it's like the devil's just fear mongering. It's this like antiquated belief, etc. And those of us who are like in the space of interviewing and documenting this stuff, we go, oh, yeah, it's a lot. It's much. You don't realize how real it is. And maybe that's the great lie that Satan has perpetuated, is that like, I'm not real. So say all this stuff, what you say matters, right? Look at our rage culture. Look at everything that's happening in our culture and ask ourselves, is that the fruits of the Spirit? One thing I've been really deeply moved by, unforgiveness of self, which is really interesting. But think about that. Like people were just like angry, and social media is like public venting and like at each other's throats. Are we kinder to each other than we were 30 years ago? And it's like, man, it's tough. So we need Jesus more than ever. And I think that stat about the rise in reported possessions is, I think a lot more people are dabbling. I mean, you can buy Ouija boards at Toys R Us, RIP, or Target. But to be fair, that stuff also was big in the 20s. Like there used to be big public seances, et cetera. So to be totally fair, it's not like this is the first time this stuff's been, I just completed an episode and we were researching the history of Ouija boards again and seances. And it's like, oh, wow, in the 20s, after World War I, there was a massive rise in spiritualism and trying to talk to the dead because so many people were wounded and missing loved ones who had died in these wars. And so there was this attempt to try and like reach them, like a huge feud between Houdini and what's his name, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of Sherlock Holmes. Like they had a massive debate and like feud over whether you could talk to the dead through seances. They'd have big seances in Royal Albert Hall in the UK, like publicly. So, putting it in historical context.
Wow. Have you found in your own life an increase in warfare? Like, do you have a target on your back because you're doing this work?
I mean, for me, spiritual warfare comes down to, like, when I'm writing something for this, it's a lot harder. And I think, one, that's the gravity and the severity of what we're talking about. But also, I think it's opposed. We have a lot of technical issues. First time we interviewed Father, like a whole recording disappeared despite being double backed up. You talk to people like the producers of the movie Nefarious. You hear about all the stuff that happened. Look at the original Exorcist movie. The entire set burned down except for the bed. I mean, wild stuff that happened. And you go, is it self-fulfilling prophecy? Is it, I don't know. Actually, do yourself a favor, Google The Last Exorcism of Emily Rose and read some of the statements of cast members of what happened. Just peculiar things. Right? So Yes, I do think we all are at war, but I tend to think that spiritual warfare for a lot of us tends to be more discouragement, war of the mind, the self-doubts, the unforgiveness. I also think too, we live in an interesting space where there's probably a line where if the forces of evil revealed themselves too dramatically to you, it risks moving you quickly into a more spiritual posture, right?
Right.
And so I do think, logically speaking, they if these things are real, they have every incentive to remain hidden and work behind the scenes to sow discord and distrust. Satan, I think, would want to kill all of us, every last one of us, if he could, but he can't, right? So I can't get rid of Jake, and I can't co-opt Jake to my side. What's the only thing left? Can minimize Jake's impact, discourage him.
Do you have any regrets of your own? Anything you wish you'd done differently if you look back to, like, let's say your early 20s? Any advice you'd give your younger self?
Yeah, I mean, I would pick one thing and get really good. There's a proverb at it. And again, that God can restore the year the locusts have taken. That being said, just because he can do that doesn't mean you should take advantage of that and not take seriously the precious time we have on earth. But I wish I had pursued an Amazon strategy in my life where I was like, get amazing at this, then do that, then do that, then do that. You don't start off going to the moon and making prescription drugs, right? You start off selling books and CDs, then maybe some, other like shopping marketplace stuff. And I was all over the place, kind of chasing the glamorous, cool stuff. I didn't really have a deep respect for just like an honest, hardworking job. Always had a little bit of entitlement of I should be further along than where I am right now. And so, yeah, I've always felt I've had been on kind of a Joseph journey in that regard. And so I would tell people, like, get good. There's a proverb, right? Show me a man skilled in his craft, and I'll show you someone who performs before kings. And I think with AI and everything coming down the pipeline, like people who are amazing at what they do, there's always a market for them. Always. Whether you're a contractor, a designer, a doctor, like the word gets out fast. Jake's great at what he does. Ryan's really good at what he does. And it's a lot more efficient and a lot simpler than I think I realized that it wouldn't have taken that much longer. You put your head down and for a couple of years, you get awesome at something versus spreading yourself super thin. So that is something I wish that I had picked early on. On the other hand, right? Proverbs 16:9, a man's heart chooses the way, but the Lord directs his steps. And everyone's on a journey. And God knows exactly how much you can steward and what he wants you to steward. And if you are, I haven't worked out the free will debate yet in my head. Another theological issue I'm stuck on. It's probably yes and yes. I don't have Morpheus here to explain it to me. But in my head right now, it's kind of like we're on a ship and the main decision is like, are you going to steer towards God or away from God? And that's your big thing. And then he brings the waves and the storms and the winds that get you. And he also knows like when he wants you to arrive. And sometimes we do this and we turn the other way and we don't listen and we try to sail into the wind. And he's like, dude, seriously, just please turn. Are you not turn around? Fine. I'm going to really do this. Right. And then you get mad and you're like, I wish I had turned this way sooner. But who am I to say? Because maybe when I'm sure I get there, he's like, you got here exactly when I needed you to get here. I don't know. There's a lot there, but I would just say be patient and put your head down. We wrapped up on this new show we're doing with CBN. We just wrapped up our first 6 interviews with these incredible Christian leaders who just have phenomenal advice and wild stories that'll break your box of God calling them to do unconventional things that were born out by fruit, right? Because again, test these prophetic and charismatic leanings by scripture and reality. And time after time, they didn't watch each other's interview. They all said the same thing in some way, shape, or form, which is God prepares in private what he wants to do public. So are you carving out the time in private when no one's looking? How's your prayer life? What are you doing? Are you spending time with God? And if you don't do that privately, it limits what he's going to do with you publicly. And so I would encourage myself, hey, you need to get that relationship down even more because it's pretty powerful. And just like when I hear 6 exorcists say unforgiveness of self is a huge doorway, I'm going, whoa, I should listen to that. When I hear 6 incredible spirit-led pastors and business leaders and investors all say quiet time, putting God first in everything usually leads to better outcomes. I go, it ain't rocket science. Probably should do that more. So that's my big admonition to anyone young too. And then if you're at the other end and you're like, man, I missed out. I messed up. Spent my 20s just, doing the wrong thing. God does restore the year the locusts have eaten. And Moses was 80 when he got started. So never know. Never know when your time will come.
Can you tell us more about the theology of forgiveness of self? It's a fuzzy subject for me, and I haven't heard anyone really
Yeah.
explain that.
I don't know if there's a theology other than we have to forgive ourselves. I mean, obviously Christ commands us, we have to forgive each other, right? As the Lord's Prayer says, help us forgive us our sins as we forgive those who have sinned against us. But if you're holding on to something where you're just I can't forgive myself, it's almost I don't know if this is theologically correct, but in my head, it's almost a form of idolatry to say, no, my sin, I can't let go. I can't forgive. And it's about trusting God and saying, God, I do trust you to take away this sin. Because it's a matter of faith, right? I either believe that Christ's sacrifice was sufficient or not, right? And so who am I to look the creator and say, one, I messed up beyond what you can do with me. That's just heresy, right? To resent oneself and say, no, God, why did you make me this way? Romans 9, right? Who is the clay to say to the potter? So honoring God made you the way he wanted you, having some trust, because there are things we all just hate about ourselves, right? When I'm talking about when we just, can't get over our weaknesses and we just get down on ourselves, I think that's when we cross over into resenting the good that the creator made. Just accept that we're on a journey and he's making that song, he's making diamonds out of us. And that's ultimately what we want to be. So just forgiving yourself, forgiving others. And also I'd say too, forgiving oneself too involves, fear, which is negative faith. And it's when you start getting too down on yourself, you also are assuming you know all the variables. You don't know if there was a demonic attack against you. You don't know. And again, I do believe the scripture, God puts no temptation in front of you that you don't have the means to get out of. But it also he knows that you will slip up, right? And so trusting that God made you, knowing you would fall. And he still said, it's still better to have Jake and Ryan in the world, So, yeah, but it's tricky. I don't know. You can tell I'm a spiritual mutt right now trying to figure out a lot of this stuff. And so, yeah, we'll have to run this podcast by a Protestant pastor and theologian and see if anything I said is heretical. So
I think it still honors the Lord. You're seeking the truth, and you're being humble about it, and I admire you for that.
Truth, man.
I wanted to ask you a couple of practical questions. First, the podcast thing, I'm sure you've seen, it's a packed space now. In the last 5-10 years, just feeling like everyone's running one now. And somehow, even in the midst of that, you've found a lot of success. So, two-part question. What advice, generally, practically, would you give to someone who's trying to run one and make an actual career out of it? And two, is it too late? Is the space just too saturated now? Or would you say, no, man, it's a blue ocean. You got a great idea and you produce it well, you're going to have wild success.
It's extraordinarily difficult. If you have distribution, you'll notice a lot of big podcasts are celebrities. 2 days ago, top of the charts was Amy Poehler and her new podcast, right? It is assessing whether you want to get into that, field. I kind of liken it to playing a professional sport. I think you have to have a certain amount of qualifications and then anything's possible, but it's some, realistically, there's some things you just can't get into and be I don't have the abilities to do this. That being said, putting my Christian hat on, right? If you feel God's called you to do something and you want to do it, right? If you're in it because you're hey, there's a lot of people do podcasting. I do this with another show where I just like talking to people. I don't care if it makes money out of that stuff. I'm just doing it because it's fun. And I like having a conversation like this. So managing expectations is great. Practically though, yes, it's extraordinarily competitive. You'll notice the charts fluctuate in and out all the time. But if you have a big audience, or just if you're some of the biggest podcast networks when they started were email marketing companies. They had huge lists. So that's why you see a lot of influencers have podcasts, right? It's very similar to writing a book, right? Write a book because you want to write a book and you have something to say. But as you know, 90% of books sell fewer than 500 copies and that's why all the publishers want someone with a big platform, right? Because they want to get it out there. So platform is key with podcasting. It's also a slow grind. I know people who are just now making it after grinding for 2 years. Most people give up after 5 or 6 episodes. But again, it depends on your goal. If one person saw it and was changed by it for the better, is it worth it? Probably. There's a lot of podcasts out there. I am bullish on kind of limited series podcasts that are more story and entertainment driven. and knowing a niche. So if you have a niche that hasn't been done, that's also encouraging. Try a different format. That's also important to try too. Just how can you be different? I'm working with someone right now, even who their original premise was, oh, I'm going to do cool fireside chats. I was like, I tried that. Everyone does that. So how can you do something different and then stick with it? That's the single biggest thing. I'm excited. We're launching this show with Christian Broadcast Network and 700 Club, et cetera. And one of the reasons that I encourage them is like, they've got a huge following. They've got a wonderful network of people. And it's a great opportunity to like service those people who want to have podcast content, right? That's on their brand. That's great. If you're starting from scratch and you have no audience or nothing, it is, not gonna lie to you, it's a tough climb. We were successful. We did a lot of promotion. Plus we were partnered with iHeartRadio, who has enormous reach. I can't discount how fortunate we were to work with them and them help it out. It's a huge, huge thing. So yeah, it's knowing what, and then just assessing your goals and why you're doing it. If you're doing it for money and to make money off ads, really tough, not a blue ocean. But you're doing it because you have something to say, you want to make something cool and you just enjoy it, go for it, right? And as we know, with God, all things are possible, even succeeding at podcasting.
Even succeeding at podcasting. All right, this one's a pivot, and we'll wrap up with this one then. What's one or two core principles that guide you on a daily basis? Truths about the world or beliefs in general that guide how you show up in the world?
One, every day I remind myself, you will die one day. You will die. So what you're worried about, what you're concerned about, what you want to do, ask yourself in light of this information, which you know, but you don't always recognize, like you will die one day, right? So how does that influence what you're going to do? And with that, you will also stand before God one day and you will give an account. So what are you going to do about that? Right? And the older you get, the more those questions become very sobering, but they're healthy, right? That's a psalm, right? Lord, teach me to number my days, right? There's a healthy freedom that comes with divorcing yourself from the world. I'm in the world, but it's not my permanent home, right? So that's something. And then two, I try very hard with very mixed results to ask myself, Lord, like, I trust you. What do you want to do today? And I remind myself that I have never accurately predicted almost anything in my life. Like if you really, I deeply admire the person who went to dental school and became a dentist and has a great practice and got married as a kid and retired. Like that's a great linear, I would say most people, if they need encouragement in this, like if you'd asked me 6 years ago, hey, you're going to be co-hosting an exorcism podcast with a Catholic priest, I'd be like, what? You just don't know what God's got for you. So there's a great quote, I'll finish with this, in Castaway, Tom Hanks, yes, where he has a volleyball for companionship, lost on an island. It's a beautiful Ron Howard film. And at the end of the movie, he's sitting with his friends, now rescued, and they said, like, and he's telling them about his, like, when he tried to kill himself and he couldn't even do that. And he's like, I had power over nothing. He's like, and then one day a sail came in, like the tide brought a sail, right? And he used that to escape the island. And so he goes, I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but I do know what I have to do because tomorrow the sun will rise. I have to keep breathing. And who knows what the tide will bring in. He wasted away for 3 years on that island. And then one day tide brought it in. So I always like ask myself, like, hey, tomorrow, who knows what the tide might bring in.
That's worth ending on. Yep. This has been a great conversation, Ryan. I'm so grateful that you exist. You're doing the Lord's work in interesting ways. And I'm super glad that you were willing to come on today. If you don't mind, we might even ask you to come on again in the future. You've got more stories to tell.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Ryan. Have a great week. Take care.